When people hear the name Kiyosaki, a lot of them think about Robert, but there's another half to that Kiyosaki team, and that's Kim Kiyosaki. And let me tell you, she's a heavyweight. She really has some phenomenal perspectives, ideas, is energized around them. There's a lot to learn from her, and my partner Jeff Hayes sat down with her to have an interview that you definitely want to see. So let's tune into it right now.
Kim, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. So tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So my name is Kim Kiyosaki. I was raised in New Jersey, just outside New York City. When I was 14, my family moved to Oregon, which was a big change. And then we took a family vacation to Hawaii. And when I was 17, and I thought that the luckiest people in the whole world lived in Hawaii, and that's where I was moving. So went to college 2 out of my 4 years in Hawaii, graduated from the University of Hawaii, and started in advertising and advertising sales. And my very first job out of college, I was fired. And I'm like, okay. But the company hired me back, and 6 months later they fired me again. And at first I thought, what is wrong with me? Am I incompetent? And I'm like, I'm not incompetent. But what I realized is I really hated working for somebody else, and I really was going to excel better in my own business. So I was searching of what I was going to do because I had no idea of how to start a business, wasn't around entrepreneurs growing up. My father was a salesman. And in 1984, I had my first date with Robert Kiyosaki. And on that very first date, he asked me, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, seeing as the way things are going, I said, I want my own business, but I don't know where to begin. And he said, well, I've started many businesses and all of my friends are entrepreneurs. And I'm like, this is where I need to be right now. And 3 months later, I had my very first business and created a logo, embroidered it on shirts and jackets. And I have a saying that every business must have a purpose. And the purpose of this business was to fund and pay for my travel, hotel, and entry fees into business conferences all around the U.S. And I'd set up my little stand, and I had my shirts and my sweaters and my jackets with my logo. And I sold them at all these business conferences so that I could spend a year learning how to run and grow a business. That's how I started as an entrepreneur. So being fired was actually a blessing in disguise, was the best thing that could have happened for me.
So I love this. You self-funded your education.
I did.
And-
Because I went to college with a business degree, but learned almost nothing about how to be an entrepreneur.
This need still exists, and where we continue to put people through school, through college, and somehow think that being an entrepreneur, somehow we're supposed to know that from birth.
Yes, and they keep trying to teach it in school, but it can't be taught unless somebody has actually been an entrepreneur, because you never know what you're going to face every single day. I think the keys to really being a successful entrepreneur, one is by far perseverance and resiliency. How well are you going to come back from a setback? I think that's probably the number one character trait of an entrepreneur is resiliency, because every day we're facing something we don't know, we're facing a problem, and if we back down from the problem, our business doesn't grow. We've got to push through and solve the problem, and oftentimes it's an unknown.
My mentor used to say the key to your success is how much discouragement can you take before you quit.
Yes.
I wish it was something else, but that's the reality. So let's go back. You've started this.
And to that point, though, that's why when you start a business, there's got to be a strong reason why you're doing it. That's why I say when it has to solve a problem, because if there's not a strong reason why, it's got to be bigger than just making money. Because if it's just to make money, exactly as you say, as you come up against those problems, you're going to quit. But if there's a bigger reason in your core, in your soul, for why you're taking on this challenge, when those tough times come, you'll keep going.
So let's go back.
Okay.
You're in your first business. It's a year. You've spent a year learning. What happens next?
Well, then I decided, okay, so I've completed the purpose of that business. And so then Robert and I talked about going into business together. So we moved from Hawaii, we were living in Hawaii, and we moved to California, and we started a business teaching entrepreneurship. And we grew that business from two offices to, we had 11 offices in 7 countries. And we took that business as far, it was a great business. We were in Australia and New Zealand and Hong Kong, Canada, US, and it was a great business, but the model was very, very labor intensive and very expensive. And so to take it to the next level, we either had to redesign the entire company or let it go and start something new. So we decided at that point, we had taken the company as far as we wanted to take it. And one other thing happened, I'll tell you in a minute. But we took it as far as we wanted to take it, so we said, it's time that we end and let's go do something else. Now, adversity. So one of the things that happened is in this business, we were teaching entrepreneurial seminars. And people would come to these seminars, and actually many of them would make great changes in their life, very positive changes. Well, at the same time, there was the David Koresh,
Waco.
That whole thing was happening, and there was a minister who had written a book about cults. And so the Australian version of 60 Minutes came to film us and said, hey, we want to do this great story on you. You're making great entrepreneurs. You're having all this success. And we're like, yeah, come on in. We're an open book. We'd love to have the story done. So they film us and they do all these interviews. And in 60 Minutes of Australia airs. And here's one of our instructors, and he's on stage, and it says, cult leader. And so, long story short, we were not a cult. But it was the power of the press at that time. And so what happened was, it was called the ABC, the Australia Broadcast Corporation. They had the largest unsolicited letter writing campaign from all of our students who said, you're wrong, this is a mistake, and they were sure we were going to sue them. And we're like, you know what, this may be a sign. This might just be a sign that it's time to move on and do something else.
The door's closing.
Yeah, so we'd close the doors. So sometimes adversity can be the best thing.
So now let's go back. So now you guys, you're in California. You've 11 offices decided, okay, we're going to move on.
We're going to move on.
What's
yes.
the next move?
So we started the business in California, and then in 1988 we moved to Oregon. So the business was going in Oregon, and it was 1994 when we decided to end it. And by that time also, we were also investing in real estate and rental properties. So we started that business in 1985 in California. In 1988, we moved the business to Oregon, and so we're operating it out of Oregon. 1989, started investing in real estate and rental properties. So by the time we decided to end the company in 1994, we were actually financially free. And we had, basically when we say financially free, people think we have, millions of dollars saved up and we can live for the rest of our lives on the money we have, and that was not the case. The case was that we had $10,000 a month coming in every month from our rental properties, but we only had $3,000 a month going out in living expenses. So we had more coming in passive income than was going out every month, and so at that point we were financially free. And the beauty of that is that for the first time, I was able to ask myself, what is it I really want to do with my life? Now I can take a little bit of a break, take a little bit of a breather, and have the luxury to ask myself that question. And so Robert and I we spent probably 6 to 9 months trying to figure out what is it we want to do, and do we want to do something together, do we want to do something separate? And in the meantime, we had people constantly asking us, how did you get financially free? How'd you do it? How'd you do it? So we're like, instead of us traveling all over the world and telling people what we did, we love games. So why not, what if we could create a game, a board game, that would teach people exactly what we did to get out of the rat race and become financially free? So we started working on that. And again, we've never made a game. We were just making it up as we go and trying to take a financial statement, an income statement, and a balance sheet and turn it into the scorecard of the game. It was like brain cells were dying every day. Sometimes we'd say, I think it's time for a 2-pitcher night. And a 2-pitcher night was after working on the game all day long, we'd go down to our local pizza parlor, get a pizza and 2 pitchers of beer. And we'd celebrate that day, and then we go back to work the next day. And we finally created this game. We actually had a gentleman that was working with us, very computer savvy. And so he would take all the numbers, because we had different deals. We had, real estate deals, we had stock deals, we had business deals, and we had the numbers and the return on investment and the cash flow. And so he took all these numbers, paychecks, downsized, children, and he ran them through a computer simulation 150,000 times to make sure that our numbers were geared up correctly. And so that game was called Cash Flow. And we launched that game in 1996. And as we were launching the game, we're like, we really need a brochure for the game. So Robert said, I'll work on it. So he started working on this brochure and kept working on it and kept working on it. And finally, the brochure comes out. And the brochure is a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Wow.
So we started with the game, and then the book came as a result of the game.
So it's amazing to me. I wasn't familiar with the game until a couple of years ago, and I've mentioned it. I bet it's popped up 5 or 6 times in the last year where somebody told me this is what they did. That like their fortune and their education for their kids, it was started with that game.
Yeah,
Still.
that game is how it was what we did step by step to become financially free.
It's amazing. It's like it deserves to live forever and hopefully replace Monopoly, which was based on a whole different principle.
Yes. And they call it Cash Flow Monopoly on steroids.
There we go.
And then at one point, the New York Times came years ago to do a story on the Cash Flow game. And the journalist called us from New York and said, do you know you have a cash flow club here in New York? And I'm like, no. She goes, that's about 1,000 people.
Wow.
I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, I think you have cash flow clubs like in other places around the world. And we're like, what? And so we started researching it, and we found, and a cash flow club is just, it could be 6 people and they just get together, or it could be 1,000 people. They get together on a regular basis and they play the game. And all of a sudden, when Robert and I heard there's 3,500 that we know of cash flow clubs, it made our hearts sing because the mission statement that we created, the mission of the Rich Dad Company from day one, was to elevate the financial well-being of humanity. And the purpose for the game was that people could teach people. And so when she said that and we started researching it and we found that all these clubs have popped up spontaneously, we're like, oh my gosh, the mission is being fulfilled. So the cash flow game is really near and dear to our heart.
Well, our tagline for our company, my partner Patrick and I, is movies that make movements. And this is, you look at the movement
Yes, yeah.
that you guys created.
Yeah.
All right, so
I wish we could say it was all planned.
No,
but it
well, you
definitely
can
wasn't.
now. You can now. The winner gets to write the history. So you can say, yeah, that was the whole plan. So go back to now. You've got this book that was going to be a brochure,
Yes.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and that had quite a life.
That did. We took it to a few publishers. They wanted nothing to do with it. So we were forced to self-publish, and we self-published. And where it started, where it got its first push, is a friend of ours in Austin, Texas, had one of those big car washes, those super car washes with the convenience store attached. And so we asked him. We said, "Hey, can we put a couple dozen books in your car wash?" And he goes, "We don't sell books." And we're like, "Yeah, that's right. Then there's no competition." So we had originally printed 1,000 copies of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So we sent him two dozen copies. And I called him a couple weeks later. I said, hey, any books sell? And he goes, nope, they're all here. He goes, do you want them back? I said, no, I don't want them back. Just leave them. And then a couple weeks went by, and I called again, and I said, are there any books sold? And he goes, they're all gone. And I'm like, what do you mean they're all gone? He goes, they're gone. I said, well, who bought them? He goes, I don't know who bought them, but they're gone. Shortly thereafter, we get a phone call, and this gentleman says, hey, my name is Bill. I'm from Dallas, Texas. It's a good book you got here. And we're like, you have Rich Dad, Poor Dad? He goes, yep. Really like it. How many copies you got? And we're like, we have 1,000 less 12, or 1,000 less 2 dozen. And he goes, I got the 2 dozen. He said, I'll take the rest. And we're like, who are you? And he's like, I'm with a small company called Amway. So he was a part of Amway, and that's where the book started. A lot of it came through the network marketing industry, because we talk about passive income and residual income, which is very aligned to the philosophy of the network marketing industry. So it started there, and then the book kept growing, and we kept marketing. We did a lot of PR. It kept selling. Next thing you know, it's on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. It's on Business Week bestseller list, and then it makes the New York Times bestseller list. We were the only self-published book on the New York Times bestseller list. And then in 2000, a woman named Oprah called. And there is an Oprah effect. And Robert went on her show. The entire show was about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And Oprah is syndicated to 150 countries. So overnight, Rich Dad, Poor Dad went to 150 countries.
Wow.
Yep, and it just kept going from there. So it hits a chord with people. And I think there's a little bit of a spiritual thread throughout the book as well. It's not just about making money. It's about really, having the life you want.
Let's pick up that spiritual theme, and in your personal life. One of the things we've been surprised at a lot of the very successful people that we've interviewed in this series, it's not the greedy, the way Hollywood a lot of times portrays people that have a lot of money. They have a spiritual basis to their work.
Yeah, I think it is. When we talk about the problem that every business must solve a problem, and the problem we saw is that there's no financial education in the school system. And Robert's Rich Dad said money may not be the most important thing in life, but it affects everything that's important. It affects your level of health care, your level of education. It affects how you live day to day. So it may not be the most important thing, but it affects everything that is important. And so the impetus for us was that because it wasn't being taught in school, we decided to take on the task of educating people all over the world about real financial education. So our reason for doing it, our why for doing it, wasn't about the money. We want to make money, but the purpose of doing it was purely financial education. So it started there. And then we also followed the principles of Buckminster Fuller, who was an inventor, philosopher, futurist, he dedicated his life to the betterment of humanity. And so we follow his principles. And he talks about great spirit. Robert and I would say we're very spiritual, not religious, but we're very spiritual. And basically he talked about how can you be of the most contribution? How can you do the greatest good? He has a saying that we always followed, which is, the more people I serve, the more effective I become. So we operate from that point of view. And whenever anything looks negative, or there's something that we weren't expecting, and it was looks like a problem, looks like a bad thing, we always know something good will come out of it. So we're always looking for the lesson in the mistakes, the lesson in the failures, the lessons in the negative happenings in life. We always look for the lesson, and that makes us smarter. So I think from that point of view, it's kind of a bit of a spiritual path there.
Well, I think I know enough about you to know that and you guys, you eat your own cooking. It's like, so you know, you taught a lot about real estate, taught a lot about, and it's also, you really are really large real estate investors. Talk about, if you would, you know, what you guys have built and how you built it.
There's real teachers and there's fake teachers. So if I ever want to learn something from somebody, I want to learn from somebody who's doing what it is I want to do. So academia is full of fake teachers. You know, they tell you what to do, they tell you how to do it, but they've never done it themselves. Or I know a lot of consultants. They'll tell you what to do, but they've never done it themselves. So what Robert and I teach are only things that we've done. So my real estate investing started in 1989 in Portland, Oregon, and Robert started to explain to me what his rich dad taught him about investing, and specifically real estate investing. And he goes, "Okay, go buy something." And I'm like, "What do you mean go buy something? I don't know what you're talking about." So I stumbled and bumbled along, and sure enough, just a few blocks from where we lived, there was this little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, and put an offer in. Offer was accepted, and as soon as that offer got accepted, I was scared to death. I'm like, "Oh my God, what if I make a mistake? What if I lose money? You know, what if the roof leaks? What if the tenant moves out? What if I humiliate myself?" All this doubt was going on, and I was really nervous because I've never done this before, and it was $45,000, and I had to come up with a $5,000 down payment, which we did not have. So not only am I afraid of losing money, first we got to find the money, and then what if I lose it? So all these doubts were going on in my mind. The voice was just chattering. But finally, push came to shove, and the day came to sign the papers, so I stepped over the line. We figured out how to get the money, which was a great thing because a lot of people say, "Oh, I'll start investing when I have the money. I'll start my own business when I have the money." You never have the money because there's always an emergency or something that comes up. So the fact that we didn't have the money for that property or the next 10 properties was the best thing because it forced us to get very, very, very creative. You know, it comes out of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He says, don't say I can't afford it, ask how can I afford it. Don't say I can't do it, ask how can I do it, because that opens up your mind and gets you thinking. So we got very, very creative in how to finance properties when we didn't have the money. So long story short, I signed those papers, we bought that house, and every month I would collect the rent, I'd pay the expenses, I'd pay the mortgage, and at the end of the month, I'd have a whopping $25 positive cash flow. And that's how I started.
And then take us through the saga a little bit further. What does that look like now?
Today, the formula is the same. It's the same formula that we use today on a 400-unit apartment building as that little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. So we bought the next property and the next property, then we bought a 4-plex, then a 6-plex, then a 12-plex, and kept stepping up. And today, I'd say we have about 6,500 units. We have commercial property. We have 4 golf courses, 2 resorts, plus plus oil and gas, silver and gold, things like that. But the key is it's not rocket science, and people are very, very afraid of the word debt. They think of debt as a 4-letter word, but there is such a thing as good debt. You know, bad debt is your credit cards, your personal house, your car loans, your student debt. That's bad debt that you have to pay for. But good debt is debt that you borrow, for example, on rental properties, for businesses, that actually makes you money. So sometimes just getting a mind shift change, a paradigm shift around the way you look at money and the way you define words, such as debt, can make a huge difference.
When you have a lot of debt, even good debt, what about in a downturn where if all of a sudden property values go down?
Oh, that's a great question. Because there probably will be a downturn pretty soon. We're expecting it. A lot of people will buy high-end properties. You know, they'll buy the luxury units and the luxury apartments and the luxury buildings. We don't do that. We buy middle-of-the-road properties because for exactly that reason, if the markets turn, then the first people that are going to downsize are the people from the high luxury units to the lesser expensive ones. So we're middle of the road. So we might take a little bit of a hit. In 2008, we took a little bit of a hit, but nothing serious, because people that moved out, other people moved in. So it's, again, a lot of it is just common sense and getting your ego out of the way as much as possible, which is why, personally, I think women make great investors of all sorts, of real estate and paper assets, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, of business. Just an opinion of mine is that women are a little more practical. They're less emotional when it comes to money. And once they understand money and how it works and how to grow it, I see women become great, great, great investors. I think one of the main problems for women is not only have we not been taught anything about money, but what we have been taught is to depend upon somebody else for our financial well-being, be it a husband or a family member or the government. That's actually what we've been taught since we've been a little girl. You know, Prince Charming will come, and is he a good provider? All of these things that's conditioned into us to not depend upon ourselves, and that's one of my key missions, is to teach women about money and about investing so that they can depend upon themselves and not have to depend upon somebody else. Because all too often, we women, as we get older, find ourselves in a financial crisis due to divorce, death of a spouse, or just really bad money management. And the next thing you know, these things happen. She has no idea where the money is, if there is any money, and she ends up broke. So I don't want women to become a statistic. I want them to be empowered to take care of themselves financially.
I know that's important to you, and I love
Yeah.
that. Let's just do a scenario there. So let's take a 38 or 42-year-old woman who finds herself widowed or divorced. She's got a couple of kids, credit card payments, less income. Maybe she's been out of the workforce for a while and she's re-entering it. And she manages to get lucky enough to sit next to you at a dinner and looks at you and says, okay, I want to win before this is over. What do I do? What would you tell her? What's a strategy for her to...
That's a great question. Well, the first thing she needs to do is handle survival. So maybe it is to get a job or to get a part-time job. She's got to handle survival and get that stable. At the same time, the first thing I would say to do is start learning the language of money, because the jargon, there's so much jargon out there, and all these financial advisors, financial planners, stockbrokers, real estate brokers, they love to throw out all this jargon, and I think it's just a guise to confuse you and keep you at their mercy. Like, oh, you need me because you're not going to understand this. If you just understand the language of money, for example, in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, asset versus liability. Rich Dad said, an asset is something that puts money in your pocket whether you work or not. And a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket, right? Well, so this jewelry, and in the banker's world, he or she would say, oh, well, that's an asset. Well, if I sell it, it's an asset. But as long as it's just sitting on my finger, it's just stuff, right? Or your car is an asset. Well, every month you're paying money out of your pocket for gas and insurance and maybe a car loan, so it's a liability. So one of the keys is not calling liabilities assets. It gets people very, very confused. An asset is something that will make you money every single month, whether you work or not. So understanding the language is number one. Then number two, I would say you just got to get some education. Take a seminar, go online, start learning about, there's 4 asset classes. There's business, real estate, paper, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and commodities, gold, silver, oil, coffee, soybeans. And as you're learning about these different asset classes, you'll find that there's one of them that speaks to you more than the other. So I've taken stock option classes, and I've done my darndest to learn it and sit in front of that screen and make some trades, and my mind just doesn't work that way, and I don't want to sit still all day. But when I found out about real estate, and I went for that first real estate deal in 1989, that was my game. I loved it. I love walking around the property. I love looking at where's the opportunity, what can we do here to make it better, how can we increase the income, how do we get tenants. It's a marketing issue. It's a business, and I love it. So you've got to figure out which asset class you want to focus on, and then start really small. Put a little money into the game. Just a little money, because there's going to be a huge learning curve. So one thing I tell women is, today it would cost about $20 US. You go buy a 1 ounce silver coin. And by parting with that 20 US dollars, all of a sudden you'll get interested, and you've got this coin in your hand. You'll get interested, and you'll go online and you'll see, what's the price of silver doing today? Is it up? Is it down? You'll start being attracted to articles about silver, gold, precious metals, just because you've put a little money down. So I think that's really, really important. You can talk about it all day long, but until you part with some money, until you're really in the game, nothing's going to start for you. So that's how I would start.
What you're saying is so true. I interviewed some Bitcoin experts, and so I bought a Bitcoin back when it was less than 3,000.
Yeah.
I had never checked the price of Bitcoin ever, and I said, look, I'm just buying this for 10 years. It's just a small amount of money. I'm not, and now, twice a month I'm checking the price of Bitcoin, even though I'm like, I'm not going to sell it, I'm not going to do anything.
Yep.
But suddenly, where your attention goes, that grows.
Yeah.
And so
Yes, exactly.
I love the investing and educating, and even going back to your first example of where you self-funded. Your step one was to self-fund yourself in learning.
But that is the key, lifelong learning. You never stop learning, because as soon as you stop learning, you're going to stop growing. And for example, I was with a dear friend of mine, and we're partners in real estate, Robert and Ken and I. And he said, I haven't even told you this yet. He goes, I have a new real estate investment. I'm like, what? And he's investing in billboards. So he bought billboards, a big billboard on this land, and he put up a billboard, but then he discovered digital billboards. If you do a digital billboard, you can have like 4 or 5 ads at the same time. And so he's always looking for opportunities and new ways, but it's still a real estate play. It's still a real estate deal, but he's always learning new ways to invest his money.
Yeah, and billboards are a cash flow play.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of employees required
No.
for that to, those are always interesting. Well, let's look at if a 58-year-old dentist who invested in his practice and worked, but his income is tied to his hours, working, and now is approaching retirement age. Is it too late to start in a real estate, if that's the
No, I don't think it's ever too late to start. I know of a gentleman, he was 64 when he started, and also a professional. I think one of the mistakes we make is we spend everything we make. The savings rates in America are dismal. People don't save, and I'm not an avid. I don't advocate saving for the long term. I advocate saving for your next investment. And so one of the things that Robert and I did early on is we called it the 3 piggy banks. And what we did is, this was a time when we had very little money. We had more money going out than was coming in. But we made a rule that with every single dollar that came into our household, we would take 30% off the top. 10% before we paid any bills. That money comes in 10% into a savings account, 10% into an investment account, and 10% into a tithing or charity account. And we did that religiously with every single dollar. And it was amazing how fast it built up, and it was amazing how fast you figured out how to pay those bills. And we did. So today we still follow the same rule. The percentages are just higher. But when you get into the habit, it's not how much. It's not necessarily you have to put 10%. It's the habit of putting that money aside, because it will grow really, really quickly, and that can be your first investment funding for you. So going back to our 64-year-old guy, he started small, started investing in real estate. He bought a duplex, and he bought a fourplex. And this was over time. He had saved up some money, and so he bought that, and he was making like $8,000 a month. And that was a great start for him. That was almost $100,000 a year without him working. And then what happens is you can live quite, not necessarily frugally, but keep putting some of that cash flow aside from the properties, and that cash flow then funds your next property, and then funds your next property. So it's not rocket science. It's just, number one is kind of developing the habit, getting some education, getting that first deal done, and then learning and learning and learning, and keep growing.
To me, this almost goes back all the way to the beginning, to the cash flow game.
Yeah.
It's getting your mind, just the basics of this to build on. I marvel at this, that I've had a long entrepreneurial career with spectacular highs and equally spectacular
We all have.
crashes.
We all
When
have.
you auger one of these into the ground, it is not pretty. And if I had it all to do over again, I would have built what you guys built, where you made yourself financially free, and that's the point where you can decide
Yes,
to take these entrepreneurial risks.
Yeah, that was the luxury point where we said, what is it we want to do? And I love that you say the cash flow game, because we are very much getting back to the core mission of why we started the Rich Dad Company, and that was the cash flow game, and it was people teaching people. So we actually have launched a whole new initiative where we are putting a lot of time and attention into these cash flow clubs, supporting the clubs, giving them more education, actually letting them turn it into a business if they want to. Some people just want to play the game and they want to learn, and they teach each other and they learn from each other and they invest from there. But we have something that's very unique that nobody else has, which is the cash flow game. So we really want to applaud the people that are using it and playing it and learning from it and actually teaching other people financial education. That's the core to us, and that's where we're going to put all of our time and attention.
Well, I love the movement that you started, and what you guys, I don't know, really, I can't think of anyone else who's had a more positive impact on people's finances than what you and Robert built.
Yeah, thank you.
And I love that you did that, and love that you're still enthralled with it today.
Yeah, I am. I'm working on a new real estate deal right now.
Of course you are.
And we're working on those cash flow games, and Robert's writing more books. And I think the most important thing is when we travel all over the world, when somebody comes up and says, thank you for the work you've done, that's the most humbling thing of all. And we don't do it for the money. We don't do it for the acknowledgement. We set out to, as Buckminster Fuller said, where can you be of best contribution? He said, don't ask what it is you want to do. What is it God wants you to do? And so that's what we keep following. What are we here to do? Where can we make the greatest contribution? And that's what drives us.
It's so great. Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Kim Kiyosaki. I thought Jeff did an amazing job interviewing her, and it was incredible the type of information that came out from her. She is somebody that knows what she's doing, and her sharing that knowledge with you is something very special. So thanks for tuning in. Glad you were here.